Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. The conversation today, I can legitimately say, and I say this every time, but kind of blew my mind a little bit. So we had on Chris, who's one of the founding members of Hyve DA. They're a data availability solution, um, but that's not necessarily where the episode went. So obviously, there's probably people listening to this. They know way more about data availability than I do. But what was the most interesting part of the episode, in my opinion, was this goes beyond DA. This goes into like why are we actually all here? And I think we all want a decentralized version of the financial system. As much as that makes sense. But we can't do that if we're reliant on Amazon AWS, right? For example, or some of these other centralized solutions that currently get a lot of the data right from a lot of the chains, right, as a result of some of the solutions that are out there. And um, somebody's got to create a system that actually competes, with AWS, if we want to live in that decentralized world that we all envision. And that was what was really cool about this episode. Chris and the Hive team have been cooking for quite a while. You can tell in very very strict stealth mode. And now it sounds like they're finally very close to kind of unveiling the fruits of their labor in terms of what they built with Hive. So great episode. Really, really encourage you to tune in. If you're into data availability, if you're into really just decentralization, this episode is definitely for you. So hope you guys enjoy it. Obviously, if you do, please like and subscribe. And yeah, we'll talk soon. All right, welcome everybody back to another episode of Proof of Vision. Really excited to bring this one for you today. We've got Chris. He's one of the founding members of Hive DA. How you doing, Chris?
Doing fantastic. Thank you, Kirk, for having me. It's a pleasure to finally be on the podcast. A lot of good friends working alongside you. So, again, it's just reuniting with the family today. It's a pleasure for me.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's always good to do that on a Monday morning or whatever time it is for you. It's a Monday morning for you too. So,
Of
um,
course.
cool. Well, let's jump into it. Let's talk about your background. What were you doing before crypto, or was this it? And talk about maybe your journey into crypto and what led to Hive. Let's tackle those three things, and talk about your journey a little bit.
Hmm. Yeah, I appreciate you. That's a great question. And I wish it was the latter. I wish it was always that. I mean, I'm from Montreal. So, for people that do know the story of crypto, really the OG days, Montreal has been, weirdly enough, because Montreal is not considered like a key, places in the world for wealth or whatever, but a lot of the key players in the initial Bitcoin wave, a lot of it were from Montreal. Vitalik partially as well made his way in, and a lot of his friends and close people that bring the whole story of Bitcoin and eventually smart contract and development were in Montreal. So unfortunately, I was there back in the days, but I was not yet active in terms of like the crypto development. So I used to work as an helicopter mechanical engineer. So I was working on aircraft. I did this for a couple of years and eventually just find my way, for a very long story short, find my way attracted to Asia and decided to go on a TradFi adventure to Asia and ended up in Shanghai. So I lived for about 7 years in Shanghai, where I was very lucky to be introduced to some very relevant people in the space, pretty much from the get-go. Um, Also with my wife, who at the time was one of the first workers at Binance. At that time, Binance was not clearly known, by the way, but she found her way into this tiny company, and it was super interesting. And I was paying attention. I already knew part of it, part of the blockchain development back in the days, but I was not. I don't consider myself an OG, to be clear, because I have a lot of friends that are way too OG for me to even compare myself. So yeah, long story short, from China, just met a lot of great people. Started building mainly in the DeFi space. So back in the day, I was one of the founding member of a company known as Kien or Cien or Cyan. A lot of people pronounce it differently. So we were mainly helping a lot of the LST protocol to develop some yield strategies on different chains. Um, Sorry, it's still Monday morning. My voice is kind of a wreck, so apologies in advance. So yeah, basically we were focused on LST, so working very closely back in the day with people like Lido, Stater, Rocket Pool, and helping develop the LST ecosystem on whether it was Ethereum, Optimism, Arbitrum, Avalanche, and so on. So that's pretty much my background. I'm more of a DeFi guy who ended up finding his way to meeting some of the most extraordinary people and finding his way into infra. And so today I act as one of the co-founders slash, I'd like to say CGO of Hyve who's a data infrastructure company, more specifically transient object storage and or DA. We do a bit of everything, but happy to touch on that later. And so yeah, from DeFi to infra, I'd like to say this is the best way to TLDR my story.
Awesome. I love talking to DeFi guys, so thank you for being a DeFi guy. That's my bread and butter. And I have heard of it. I have heard of Sion, or I used to call it Cayenne. That's my American way of butchering the
There
name.
you
But yeah, no. So I am actually well aware of it. No, it's awesome. And I guess the first thing I want to do actually is I want to peel back this idea of data availability. What is it? Break it down for the audience a little bit. What is it and why does it matter? And why are like companies like Hyve and Celestia and Eigen and all of these providers like coming to try to take the pie, I guess, in that particular field of blockchain? What is it and why is it so important?
Yeah, awesome. So I'll keep it as simple as I can for the explanation, because going from DeFi to infra, and again, I'll keep it. I'll elaborate a little bit later on when I don't want to go too deep on DA, but specifically DA for those who are familiar, let's say, with the core layers of blockchain. We have the core settlement layer. Settlement layer, speaking often of L1s. So you have blockchain like Ethereum that everybody knows, Bitcoin, Solana. Let's take some of these for the beginning, and then after that, these solutions, so specifically Ethereum here, is incredibly important and adopted when it comes to the DeFi realm. And there's core limitation to this architecture, so it's incredibly safe. It's the most battle tested, the safest in terms of the amount of asset stake and the amount of security participant in this ecosystem. However, when it comes to the chain itself, there's some serious limitations in terms of scaling, aka in terms of adoption, in terms of amount of transaction that can be spawned at a certain moment in time. And so for that, there's multiple solutions that happens over the year, but one of the most solid was obviously the roll-up adoption. And so most people are familiar with L2s. Again, there's a couple of well-known names. The OGs would be like OP, Optimism. There's also Arbitrum, and then after that, there's like the new waves of L2s. Speaking of, for example, there's a Mega ETH. There's new L2s every day, so keeping up is the real challenge at this point. But then the idea is the fact that these L2s can basically borrow the data of Ethereum. So what they do is they're scaling the execution, but then the data remains pretty much the same mechanism. And so when you have an L2, what you want is there's two important matters so that the scalability happens is the amount of execution you can enter inside of a blockchain. And then there's the amount of data that you can keep track of at all time. So since a blockchain is basically able to enter a certain amount of data within a block, let's say that you have a block, there's some information, this information goes into blockchain. This is fantastic. But this block don't happen every millisecond. So when there is, for example, a bunch of transactions waiting to be included within a block, all the people within an ecosystem, let's say the L2, these people, they gotta be able at all time to follow track of like what's going on. So if you're placing a trade and I say like, I'm gonna sell that amount of token, and you before placed an enormous trade that was also selling the same amount of token, and that the primary block was not entered in the blockchain, then all these transaction waiting has to be able to still be in a verifiable space. And this is mainly why data availability is used for. So it's kind of like this constant memory that helps the blockchain to have a constant verifiability of the status of the blockchain. And once all these data are then included within a block, this is where we say, okay, now you don't need to keep this constant memory. Therefore, and there's different ways to approach the problem, but you can basically get rid of this, let's say, hot memory, because now it's included into the master memory, which is the blockchain, and in this case, let's say Ethereum. So, yeah, I said I'll keep it TLDR. It was not that really, but in essence, that's what it is. DA is this technology that helps the blockchain remembers everything at all times, so to make sure that the chain is completely intact, that all the transaction is known at all time by everyone, whether or not it was included in a block. So I think that's the best way to kind of like briefly introduce what DA is used for, and specifically in the roll-up narrative here.
No, it makes sense. And I guess, take this however far you want to, but I always ask everybody, when they decided to found, the project, when you decided to create the project or create the business, what was the edge that you guys thought that you had, that kind of convinced you that you could compete, on the DA level? I know you guys do, more than DA, but like, what was the edge, I think, that you guys saw, in the way that you build things versus maybe the way that some of the other DA projects are currently building things?
Yeah, of course, that's a great question. And I mean, I think this is the time for me to make the differentiation. So just to be clear, there's a couple of key players in terms of DA, and a lot of which with who we're friend, a lot of builders that I know and respect for a very long time. So I don't plan of saying anything negative against them, but there's a clear differentiation that has to be said. So when it comes to Hyve, the core reason why we started to build this project was because there was a clear issue in this space, and this is not something that date from yesterday, which is the fact that we are all saying that we're building decentralized applications, decentralized protocol. But whether we are speaking about AI, whether we're speaking about Deepin, about gaming, about InfoFi, about SocialFi, about pretty much whatever use cases you want, it seems like most of the data, and I'm talking about in most cases, like I'd like to say 98%, 99% of the data is rooted off chain, and specifically to centralized solution. So whether it is some in-house mechanism that keep track of all the data, whether it is AWS S3, whether it is Cloudflare R2, these are centralized solution that basically most of the data goes to live on, while a tiny fraction of the data goes to live on chain, and mostly, I would say in most cases, it's for the tokenomic. So a project would have like this incredible infrastructure that feeds data in and out of centralized solution, and then they have a token and a staking contract and some very simple use cases that then is fed on chain. So DA has always been something that we took in consideration because, again, most of the known player in this space are, let's say, L1s, L2s, and most of the project root themselves on these solutions. So when we're speaking about data, most people think about DA, and that was the best way for us to introduce ourselves because we have some pretty serious DA capabilities. However, there's a core, there's multiple component to our architecture that clearly indicates that there's something different with what we're doing. And again, you could say one of these cores, two component would be the throughput that we have, which is the system of calculation for data availability, and as well as the fees. So just a second. Sorry, morning. So again, we understood that DA was something important that can be serviced. But the real end goal for us was to find a method for most of this data that normally goes to live on centralized solution and bring it in a way on chain, or at least be fully verifiable on chain. And there's multiple ways to do so. The first one that we figure out would be the best way was by routing this very unique infrastructure that we have and taking the DA approach. However, while this is something that we're able to do and that we're planning to do, and that there's already some serious conversation with large player that we plan to serve as per standard DA, there is something that we see now and we'd like to kind of like push forward now as a prime solution for us, and it's more the transient object storage route, which is the concept of, similarly like DA, you are servicing networks that has tremendous amount of data that needs to be stored and needs to be constantly and automatically verifiable on chain, whether it is on an L2 or an L1 or pretty much anybody else. But again, it gets complicated, so let's keep it this way. And so the core idea for us was to say, okay, whether you're an L2, whether you're an L1, we don't want you just to use an L2 for, again, the sake of tokenization. Because again, there's most of the data that goes off chain. So you can look at Celestia, for example. I'll give some credit to Celestia in the sense that they are the most advanced data availability solution when it comes to integration. So they have the most amount of rollup that they are servicing at the moment. I don't remember the number, but I'd like to say it's something like 40 or 50. There's a bunch of them. But what you can also sense is that even though that they have that many rollups, there's only like a very small amount of data that is uploaded and serviced every day. So they can do something like 1.3 megabyte per second, I believe, in terms of throughput. And I believe perhaps 40% of it is on the daily service. So they use 40% of this capacity for 40 rollups, right? So now we can start trying to speak of the future. A solution like Hyve DA has, from the get-go, not 1.3, but around 1,300 megabyte per second. So you can say about like 1,000 times the capacity of throughput of Celestia, and I don't know, that would make like about 30%, 30x the amount of EigenDA. So it's quite a bit more, right? It's a considerable increase. And again, there's a couple of reasons why we have this differentiation. But then the point that I'm trying to make is that, let's say that we have 1,000, and we actually have more than that, but let's say we have 1,000. It's phenomenal, but how many rollup would we need to service in order to kind of fill this capacity? Probably more rollup than there it exists, right? There's not enough rollup for that. But the reality is, again, as I said at the beginning, there's still 99% of the data that goes get offloaded to completely centralized solution, which has no capacity whatsoever to be read and communicated on chain openly. So it's a problem for centralization, for decentralization. It's a problem for matching engine. It's a problem for, well, it's an extractive problem, let's be honest. We're building this native ecosystem. We're trying everything to be connected, everything to feed each other, but then a massive amount of what we have is just thrown outside the window and goes in a place that we have no control, nor security, nor visibility on. So this is kind of, let's say, the inception story of why we decided to build a solution and why we probably are capable to do DA, but we're not exactly DA, and actually quite different.
Gotcha. Well, first, let me say congratulations on being the only business in this space that says there's not enough L2s to meet my demand. Everybody else is saying, "Oh, there's too many L2s. Like, there's way too many L2s." You are the first person that's ever said there's not enough L2s to our business model. It's hilarious. So, congratulations on that. Number one.
Thank you.
But okay, so let me conceptualize this in my mind and just say this back to you, just so I understand. Okay, so basically the majority of the data, right, that is I guess flowing on chain today is basically being outsourced to AWS, right, or Cloudflare. Did I hear that right? Okay, and I, it's funny. I remember reading this a long time ago, and I don't think anybody's brought this up in a long time. But like, everybody talks about how Ethereum's so decentralized and it's battle tested and it's hardened, but in reality, like, AWS, right, is kind of like that centralization point where somebody could attack to
Mm,
affect the network, right? So there is
yep.
always kind of like this boogeyman, right, out there that I don't think anybody ever really talks about a lot. You just talked about it, um, and so what I guess, and so you recognize that this problem existed, right? And you guys are like, hey, let's solve that problem instead of really just trying to solve data availability. So as far as that solution goes, as much as you can tell me, how do you go about attacking, a problem like that in a decentralized manner, right? Where it's not, just recreating, something that's maybe like a little less decentralized than AWS. How much can you say about it?
Yeah.
Because it's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of term you use that actually I never heard used before, or I should have known of using them. You talk about the boogeyman, and I mean, I love this term because it's true. It's like we're always kind of like trying to make those very optimistic or realistic narrative, like, oh, we're scaling, we're going to be able to do that. And very often at the beginning when we were building this project, it was interesting because if I say like our project starts at 1,000 megabyte or 1 gigabyte of throughput per second. A lot of answers that I had from VCs and longtime builders was like, "Why do you need 1,000 megabyte for?" Right? It's complete like if Celestia and Avel, let's say with like 2 megabytes per second, are able to service like a bunch of rollup and still have incredible capacity left. Why the hell would we need 1,000 megabyte? And again, keep in mind that 1,000 is only the beginning line for us. Very easily, if the adoption goes right, we could, I mean, I don't want to speculate too much, but easily we should be able to go near 20 gigabytes and so on. It can go pretty fast, pretty quickly. And so people were like, why the hell would you need that, right? Like you would basically need, and then again, DA mainly service rollups, and that's the whole issue. It's like how many rollups would you need to service in order for your project to be basically to generate some revenue, right? And that's another question. We don't make revenue. We're not a service. We're a protocol. But that's another thing that I'll touch on. I want to touch on Symbiotic very soon. Um, but in essence is and then it was so clear. It's like, well, that's you realize that the grand portrait or the grand vision of things is completely missing in this space, which is the fact that we are servicing the tokenomic aspect of things. Again, launch a token, trade a token, stake a token, lending. It's very simple use cases that we have. But in reality, the question that nobody is asking is like, if we are speculating about, Web3 replacing the mean of fintech in the future to some extent, like we say it's the bank of the future, it's never going to happen if we're not able to host all the data on the blockchain, or at least the most critical part of the data on chain. And so now we're talking about why would you need 1,000 megabyte? Because 1,000 megabyte, it's not even nearly enough to power like 4 or 5 of the biggest protocol in the world that, let's say, are doing some we can take central like clubs, right? Central limit order book. They need a tremendous amount of data store that they use most of the time some centralized solution. The same thing for InfoFi. We're talking about hundreds, thousands of messages, millions of messages per day. If you want to scale that to some extent, I mean, it doesn't take a lot of time for a business like us, 1,000 megabyte per second, to be completely full. And so there's a limited amount of thing that we could realistically power. And then comes the question of like, well, we need actually way more than 1,000 megabyte. It's not nearly enough. But most of the people see the problem, let's say, from the wrong angle, or at least that's my take.
Gotcha. Okay. So yeah, so look beyond roll-ups, right? You're looking at,
Mm,
other verticals that require much more data, than just a roll-up. You're looking at, probably traditional industries as well that have insane amounts of load. That
yep.
Yeah, so you're kind of looking towards like this 10, 20 year, goal, right? Where more of the world, not just the financial world, is transacting on the blockchain, and So I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we touched on that enough. You mentioned Symbiotic. I do want to talk about Symbiotic a little bit as well because, one of the differentiators, we just, I guess we're talking about Celestia a little bit, so I just keep them, as kind of in the forefront here as a comparison. But, obviously, the data availability is kind of tied to what the stake of the Celestia token.
Mhm.
Um, and so you guys chose a different path, kind of going with Symbiotic, kind of leaning into ETH. Maybe talk about why you did that and, why you made that design choice, I guess, and what does that do for you?
Yeah, of course. Um, so there's a couple of reasons here. First of all, and again, I'm not going to try to touch too much on them, but Celestia and Avel, again, they have, and by the way, when it comes to rollup, I just want to say they are very well to service all of them. Like I say, Celestia and Avel specifically, I have, again, many friends working in this company. I really like what they're doing. I think like they can be powering all the roll ups, and I would be fine with that. We're gonna be doing something else. Like I said, we don't need to compete with them, so we don't see them as enemy, perhaps, or at least not even realistically at this stage. I think we're doing different things, and we definitely can collaborate with each other to make all of this beautiful future, let's say, come together. But one of the reasons to answer your question, why we chose Symbiotic is very clearly because the path of launching a monolithic blockchain, let's say, to service all this data was not something that was nearly realistic for us. Um, the reason is, and again, I'm not the most technical people in the world, just to put that from, because just like yourself, I'm mainly a DeFi guy. But I know I know enough to answer this question at least. The approach of launching your own L1 to host data was again not the way to go. Um, at least not for what we were trying to achieve here, because the limitation that I mentioned, for example, Ethereum having, well, launching another L1 in order to service this enormous data need in the space wouldn't make much sense. So instead of that, what we've decided is we needed a fully decentralized architecture where operators, nodes, and stakers could come all together to basically power service this P2P network. And it's a network where basically we didn't have to provide like the initial structure. We didn't have to provide the initial how to say, because launching an infrastructure of this scale obviously is something that is incredibly complicated to do on multiple sense, but one of which is to bootstrap this ecosystem is very complicated. Symbiotic is one of the best. Well, first of all, they're very close friends of ours, so we have like the utmost respect for the team. We know them for a very long time, and again, there's many relation that goes here, but we knew that restaking, or I'd like to adopt the term that Symbiotic launched recently, which is universal staking specifically, was the way to go for us to launch this type of infrastructure. Um, so that launched a whole other debate, but basically we needed a decentralized infrastructure where we could basically make all these people, speaking of operators and stakers, come together and work in a way that is how to say, that is permissionless, fully permissionless, and do in a way that is incredibly transparent to help us thrive again, not as a service but as a protocol. And the big difference between a service and protocol is service, the goal is to, for us, our pocket, generate a lot of money and create large treasury and do what a lot of services do. Protocol is designed to thrive by itself and to basically feed those who keep this project alive, speaking in this case specifically of stakers and operators. So Symbiotic again was a no-brainer. There was other solution available at that time. There was Eigenlayer, obviously, Kirk, and others. But Symbiotic for us was, like I say, simply a no-brainer if you know the people behind the project. In terms of, like, we needed a certain amount of modularity, a certain amount of transparency, and an amount of security that we knew at that time could only be serviced by Symbiotic. And so, again, I don't want to get too deep on the reason why, others versus others, but I would like to say and re-emphasize again that Symbiotic was the only project till this day, again, that for us has the ability to kind of spawn what we are trying to do. And one of the key component, again, I'm going to re-emphasize, is this beautiful thing that they launched recently called universal staking, that consists of making restaking limitless, specifically speaking in ecosystem. So the concept of relay, which is this beautiful technology that they launch, which is imperative for Hyve to function. And again, probably I'm going to do a layup here and mention one of the technical feature that we have, which is so incredibly relevant to Web3, because let's say what we're doing is transient object storage. So people think of AWS S3 or Cloudflare R2. So why would you use Hyve? And again, this will come back to Symbiotic, but why would you use Hyve instead of these solutions, right? What is really decentralized in the way that we do things? And one of the core instances for us is the fact that using all blockchain technology, what we want to do is Hyve is basically a component, a standalone P2P component that has the ability to come attach itself natively to whatever consensus that you prefer. So, for example, Ethereum. Right. Let's start with Ethereum, but we can say the same thing with Bitcoin. We can say the same thing with Solana. So you are a builder that, for example, cares about Ethereum or Bitcoin. You want your data to be hosted incredibly fast so that you don't have to use AWS S3. And you need this data to be retrievable at all times. So you can feed this data and your partners can feed on that data. That's the reason why you would like to use a solution like ours. Now, you want this data, if again you care about decentralization to some aspect, to be retrievable at all time on the blockchain that you are aligned to. So let's take, for example, Ethereum, but again, it could be Bitcoin, it could be Solana. If Solana is the thing that you care about, you want your users, the project that you're working on, the auditors, anyone that as soon as the data exists on your ecosystem or on your protocol, it will be verifiable at all time on the settlement layer that you care about. So this is already one of the reasons why we're not just this, separate entity that exists somewhere in the centralized world that cannot be retrieved by other. It goes directly to live on the blockchain that you care. So that's the component number one. But now, how do we do so in a way that is fully unopinionated? This is really the big thing that, for example, differentiate us with some classic DA solution, which if you're talking about you have your own L1, you also have your own token. And so if I integrate your solution, I have to entrust, let's say that I care about Ethereum, I have to entrust that your other blockchain is secure. And I have to ensure as well that the token of your blockchain, which is not Ethereum, right, is a token that I can basically trust. Yep. And again, nothing against these protocol. It's fantastic. It's great. And as I wish them only success. But what it does, and it's undeniable, it's that, first of all, it extracts in terms of the consensus because it's its own consensus. But also it brings a new trust assumption to the ecosystem, which is totally fine if you trust. But the way that we do business is basically to say that we don't really want people to integrate trust. We want to adapt to the alignment they have. So this is where also Symbiotic incredibly crucial for us is if we take this Bitcoin example again, so somebody is building, let's say a term that I don't really like, but let's say a L2 on Bitcoin, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, now you have this, trading / SocialFi / deep in infrastructure that function on Bitcoin. That's amazing. You obviously care about Bitcoin though. So if I say that my solution is powered by a Hyve token or is powered by Ethereum token or Trump token, you will tell me to F off, right? Because you're like, this is not why would I build on Bitcoin if I have to trust Trump token? That's not the whole purpose of it. So first of all, we say, okay, you trust this consensus, we adapt to it. Now, Hyve as an engine needs some fuel, but the fuel that will be used specifically for your solution has to be related to BTC. And so by symbiotic relay, symbiotic universal staking, we will then adapt the crypto economic security that you care about. Speaking of BTC, speaking of state BTC or LST BTC or whatever asset that relates to BTC that you care and trust. And then by the mean of stakers, bringing that to symbiotic, staking that for operators, and we create this BTC aligned crypto economic security committee. The same thing for Ethereum and the same thing with other partners that we care about. And so, yeah, eventually it's like this very, very, very large, very modular, very flexible and customizable data solution that will be adapted to whatever consensus and tokenomic needed. That's the core idea. And my bad if my answers are incredibly long, but I'm trying to be as concise as I can. But
No,
there's a lot of data.
it's good. It's good because I mean, honestly, this is how most of our episodes go. I mean, I got to let the smart people do most of the talking, and then I do a good job listening. But I
Thank you.
think I think you definitely made, I think it's a compelling argument because you're absolutely right. And again, this is just my DeFi brain, right? Anytime there's a new trust assumption, there's more risk. There's more risk that you have to underwrite. Becomes that becomes a potential like loss of sale, right? Like, okay, that's a no brain. That's a no for me. I'm not going to do this anymore because I just can't get over the fact that I have to buy their token or I have to trust their token to do this, to do this for me, right?
Yeah.
Or the opposite. Hey, if I'm going to make that trust assumption, then I need you to concede on maybe some other things for me, or cost or like whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And it's just these friction points or drivers of non-adoption, right? And so it is very interesting to me, and I wish I could fast forward 10 years from now and see how this would play out. But like, I mean, it makes sense, though, right? Like, hey, if I'm another DA project, now I have to go convince them that my token, my chain is safe, in order for there to be any kind of a deal starter there. And it makes me wonder just that, I think on like the L2 level, maybe it's not as big of a deal because you're talking to these very technical teams. They totally, they understand these things. They can probably underwrite and get behind, some of these DA tokens and these DA layers. But eventually this has to scale again outside of the industry or outside of DeFi or outside of these people that might not be experts on this topic, right? And I think it's going to be easier to maybe sell them a menu of Bitcoin and Ethereum and these major coins that are kind of getting pressed into the mainstream now, and obviously have good economic security, to get them over the hump, right? To get them onto the blockchain, into these data availability layers. So that's just my take. I mean, that's my gut reaction, but like I think that makes sense, over the short and long term, because I think a lot of people are starting to trust Bitcoin. They're starting to trust Ethereum, again, obviously, now that, well, as of like 3 weeks ago anyway. But but it does make sense, and I wonder how it's going to play out. But I think you guys are on the right track, when it comes to that.
Well, thank you. I mean, I surely appreciate that. And again, from a DeFi guy to a DeFi guy, I mean, it means a lot as well. And I'd like to add something that I believe will probably talk to you to some extent and talk to a lot of people. Because, I talk about value extraction earlier. So there's the concept of value extraction and there's the concept of value addition. So far, when speaking about data layers, most of the time it was only data extraction to some extent. So speaking like, here's your chain, here's the way that it could basically feed on its native solution. And normally all of this value is supposed to remain in-house, right? So it's just circulating with this tiny ecosystem. But now we added those data solution that basically say, okay, I'm going to extract part of it so that you offload some of the tension or the amount of data that we have.
This episode is brought to you by Pendle. Pendle is a leading protocol in the DeFi yield sector, operating as a permissionless yield trading protocol, facilitating the tokenization and splitting of any yield-bearing assets in DeFi. This allows users to speculate on future yield or earn a fixed rate on their assets. Learn more at pendle.finance.
But by the process of it, obviously, this nothing returns back, right? It's just extractive. But again, it's at a very needed cost, right? So it's like if nobody extract there, you're just too much data. Everything becomes too expensive, too slow for everyone. So I mean, it's better to extract part of it if it is to make the whole L1, let's say, more fluent, more usable. Now, so now from a DeFi, and I want to test you out on that. From a DeFi perspective, this is the part that got me super excited. Because I understood that, first of all, there's all those beautiful tokens. Let's speak about specifically liquid staking token, which again is pretty much my inception game in this space. And I thought, like, if there's one thing that everybody loves about liquid staking token is that it's a way to basically make money, right? Generate yield by basically leveraging something that is fundamentally needed for an ecosystem, right? So if we're speaking about Ethereum, for example, you get a token like Lido. What's phenomenal is this assets is not just generated out of thin air; it's generated from the whole blockchain security itself, the concept of proof of staking. So you know that you're making money by holding Ethereum, but instead of that, you're holding this Ethereum that brings certain amount of, let's say, security to the whole ecosystem that you're trusting in the first place. So there's something that is, let's say, more, I don't know exactly how to say it, but it sparks the good idea. I'm making money not off thin air. It's just like it serves a real purpose. So the money generated there is it's very easy to explain why it's there. So the reason why I mentioned that is because for us, it's pretty much the same. It's this concept of value addition. So we're creating a way for people to basically generate some assets, for operators and stakers to bring some revenue. But instead of doing the old way that basically restaking comes with a very negative thought most of the time, because these days, unfortunately, and I'm happy to touch on that as well, when you say restaking, people think about airdrop, AVSs that are just there for the airdrop, and giving points but no real revenue, talking about security but never adopting slashing. So it's like, unfortunately, it's a phenomenal concept that was a bit, and again, I'm trying to remain politically correct, but not perfectly executed. And so unfortunately, these days, there's a bit of negative connotation when speaking about restaking. Obviously, Symbiotic, different. I want to speak about it. But now, what I'm trying to say here is that, okay, now you're saying an ecosystem has too much data. The concept of extraction, instead of that, we're talking the concept of addition. So let's say that you are working for this, you care about a certain L2. I would say just random L2, right? This random L2 has this value linked to an L1 that needs data. So what we're able to do, for example, is to say, okay, we're going to feed the protocol within your ecosystem to replace AWS S3 or whatever centralized solution that you're using. But by the mean of it, what we do is, again, as I explained, we have this engine, and this engine works on a certain amount of fuel. The certain amount of fuel is a token that is aligned to your ecosystem. And so now, by your protocol using Hyve, what we do is that it creates the needed use cases to bring this asset, as well as its LST representative, and basically to secure Hyve as a data solution for your ecosystem. And so what it means is that all the people that hold your token initially, or hold the liquid staking token of your ecosystem natively, have now a reason to send this asset, on Symbiotic restaking. Thus, it creates a restaking use case for your ecosystem that didn't exist before. So that's already additional tokenomic use cases, which is always great for an ecosystem to have. But then after that, all the fees generated from these protocol, right? So they generate fees because they're using us. All these fees goes to Hyve, and everything that comes to Hyve as quote unquote profit, we don't keep $1 of it. So what it does is it gets split. I'd like to say 50-50 per now, but it's not going to be the exact numbers, between the operators, the independent operators that make the system work, and the stakers, which are the people, for example, from your ecosystem that say to these operators, here's my LSTs, here's my native token. We trust you to secure Hive. Hive used this crypto economic security module. All the fees goes back to them. So what you're seeing is a cycle where there's new tokenomic use case, and most of the fees generated, instead of going to AWS, come back to your holders. So yeah.
Gotcha. I love it. I love it because and I know you were being politically correct about the LRT and the LST thing, but I've had multiple guests on that were building in that space, and they agreed. They were just like, it just became like this. It just became overwhelmingly more about like the points and the airdrop, and more about hype than it actually was about like maybe where the tech stack was in that current moment, which had some ways to go. Right, there wasn't a whole lot of ABS demand for the amount of stake, that had been generated through Eigenlayer and through some of these other protocols. So yeah, I mean, I think it kind of took a hit because like the industry, just like we always do, we get excited about free money, and that's what the narrative becomes about. It's about the money and not about maybe the actual like tech. But anyway, that's one thing. So we're in agreement there. But this is really cool because again, not there isn't as much demand for on the ABS side for the economic security as maybe what people initially thought. And
Mhm.
Hive kind of fills that void with this, where there is a reason to utilize that economic security. There are additional income streams coming from Hive to the stakers, and so I think that's a huge takeaway from what you just said. And yeah, I mean yeah, I mean, you call it a positive feedback loop, sustainable feedback loop, whatever you want to call it. But the more of those flywheels that exist in the space, the better that it's going to do. And obviously, it's really
Mm.
good for ETH. It's really good for BTC restakers, or whatever you want to say. It's good economic value for those token holders at the end of the day. So yeah, it's a net positive all around. Based on what I've heard at least.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that, you touch on something very important here based on what you heard. And that's the funny thing. Hive, there's a lot of things I believe we do right, but there's something that we haven't done right. And there's a couple of reasons for that, but it's basically the branding part. So as this conversation started, you spoke about DA, and we willingly introduce ourselves to say, like, okay, DA is kind of like we're able to do that and everything. But there's a very big need for us moving forward to say, like, okay, this is exactly what we're able to do. And actually, this podcast between you and I is probably the first time that I willingly put it outside publicly, let's say, aside from like private conversation with partners. Um, but there's a couple of reasons again why we chose to do that. For the most part, I would like to say is because we have a certain play that is very, very unique, and some very unique value proposition that come with a very unique architecture as well. And so we figure out like before we are fully willing or able to present this product as a piece of like, here's this theoretical magic machine that I'm talking about, we had to make sure that we were able to materialize it before going too wide and saying like, look, we have an incredible idea, however nobody knows us, so it's kind of up to grab for any of these big players, let's say, that have interest in some of the value proposition that we're bringing. So let's just say that it's us being very careful, because again, sometimes in this space, um, there's a lot of again there's a there's a lot of instances of us saying like, okay, I'm going to deploy something that is similar to something that already exists, except it's on a new ecosystem, or it's that but with a different UI, or it's that with one line of code that is different that makes it more secure. And it's totally fine. I mean, it's part of the free market, and it's good that it exists, but for us, like I say, it's completely new what we're bringing, in terms of technology, in terms of approach, in terms of value proposition, in terms of capacity, and the adaptability of our product to all of it is completely new. So we figure out like we better be quiet and just choose a narrative that everybody knows, so that we don't get noticed too hard, but still able to have a foundation for us to kind of entertain interesting conversation with key players that are well respected. Whereas if we have no Twitter, nowhere to be seen, it's a bit more complicated. But the good news is now we're very, very, very close from completion. So we should be able to start hosting our DevNet. It's going to be obviously a private one, a very private one with some key players at the beginning. But it should be very soon. So now there's nothing theoretical in what I've said today. I know it's very popular to say crazy numbers as if like, oh, at the end of the year, we're going to be able to do that. But I can tell you that it's already like the numbers that I've spoke about are real numbers that we can produce today. So none of what I said today was kind of like projecting. It's all real stuff. And then after that, I can start talking crazy numbers if you want it, but I see no purpose in that because it's already big enough what we're saying that it's like, okay, first step, we just got to come on, say like, here's who it is. Here's what we do. Here's the number that we're able to produce. Here's some battle testing and some benchmark numbers. And don't take my word, take Lido's word, take Symbiotic word, take P2P's word, take Steakhouse word, Gauntlet word. Like these are the people we're going to be working closely with. And once these guys say like, yes, I've tested, this thing is crazy and it's legit and here's the numbers, then I don't have to fight so hard trying to say that I'm not just a crazy man speaking the gospel, and trying to make people believe.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, hey, listen, if dropping alpha here on Proof of Vision, thank you, number one. But no, it's exciting to hear that you guys are so close. Definitely will have my eye on what you guys are doing, and yeah, excited to see what happens. I get it's a good time to wrap up. We covered a lot. Anything I missed that you want to cover? Anything you want to touch on before we jump?
No, I appreciate the opportunity again. I want to say thank you to you and the rest of the team as well for daring inviting me, even though that Hyve is a low player at the moment. Like I say, we remain in the shadow for quite a bit, but it's very appreciated for you to have me on the podcast today. There's really nothing else that I should be saying because everything that we have in front of us is going to be managed, let's say, it's mainly a B2B play, right? So there's a lot of large entities with who we are going to be working with, and these will come public. So I don't have nothing to invite people to come and see and act, and like there's nothing to be done. Just keep your eyes open because there's going to be some big move coming. So anybody can go on our Twitter, and that's it. We'll just keep it from there. I don't have much of a call to action for today.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, thanks, Chris. And for all the listeners out there, obviously check our show notes. We'll link you out to where you can find out more on Hyve. But it sounds like just pay attention. Pay attention to what's going to happen here in the coming months. And yeah, we'll have to have you on again here maybe towards the end of the year and see how things have kind of shaken out. But it was great.
That would be awesome,
Chris. Yeah, thanks for your time, and thanks everybody for tuning in to another episode of Proof Vision. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, Kirk. Pleasure to be here.